Welcome to a product showcase of a brand that you may not ever have heard of before. Cubitek, now exclusively available at NCIX. I'm going to start with the products I'm most familiar with. These are their ITX Enclosures, the Mini Ice and the Mini Cube. The Mini Ice is a bit of an older design. I unboxed this one a long time ago, so it's got, well, in line with the Cubitek sort of tradition, I guess we can call it at this point. Very clean lines, an overall minimalistic aesthetic. It's built entirely from aluminum, and it's more optimized for cooling than the Mini Cube. You can mount a 140mm fan in the bottom, and it comes with a 140mm fan in the top, as well as top-mounted I/O. The side has just a gap right there so that your graphics card can bring in fresh air. And as far as Mini ITX chassis go, it's not that small by today's standards, but it does have support for 4 3.5-inch drives, or you can convert one of those bays to 2 2.5-inch drives. Now this one right here, guys, this is the one I really like. This is the Mini Cube. We have actually installed a 3770K with a GTX Titan in this case, and it's like not much bigger than the size of a person's head. There you go. You do not get the option of a 5.25-inch bay like you have in the Mini Ice. You get that same top-mounted I/O. You have, well, okay, not quite the same aggressive-looking aesthetic, so it's even more minimalistic, but you've got a single 92mm exhaust fan port in the back, a 120mm intake at the bottom, which we found was actually adequate with appropriate heat sinks on everything for that 3770K and GTX Titan-based system without the Titan throttling in any way. Disassembling the case is pretty straightforward. Just take the screws off the side panel, and then you find a very unique drive mounting system, because in order to achieve this size, they had to put all cable management and drive mounts at the back. So you can put up to 4 3.5-inch drives. However, with cable management, we found it was pretty tough to fit all of them back there, but you can definitely fit a few if you're creative, and then you can kind of cram an SSD in somewhere, and you can put an awful lot of hardware into a system of this size. And next up is the Tattoo Fire 2. So the Tattoo case, probably the most exceptional thing about it is that it is available in a variety of finishes. This particular one is black on the outside, red on the inside, and it gets its name from the little tattoo down in the bottom corner right there on the right side, and on the left side. So on the front of the case, we find 5 5.25-inch bays, as well as a mesh ventilated front panel, a pretty standard front I/O, although I do like to see eSATA still, and that's on there. So we've got an LED switch for the included fans, eSATA, 2 USB 3 ports, headphone and microphone ports, reset and power. And this one up here is a little bit unique. This is kind of cool, actually. There is a USB cable coming out of the top of the case that can be tucked into little cable management holes. It is a USB Mini B, so it could be used for something like an external drive. However, I wouldn't have minded seeing it included with like an adapter or something so that you could charge your phone off of it using USB Micro B. So that's maybe something to think about for a future revision of this case. Also at the top, we've got a toolless 140mm fan that can be popped out. There you go. Has a dust filter, and installed or reinstalled or uninstalled simply like that with clips. Then at the back of the case, we find a rear 120mm fan, nice red color scheme, 7 PCI expansion slots, and a bottom mounted power supply. Side panel's got a window. We're going to open this bad boy up and have a look at the interior, which features a CPU cutout, meaning that you don't have to uninstall your motherboard in order to swap out your CPU cooler, as well as a little bit of cable management room at the back. Maybe not as much as some other cases, but the case is quite narrow, so if you're limited in terms of the space that you have available to you, that will potentially be a factor. Toolless 5.25-inch bays, and all of the included accessories inside a box that is also inside the case, which is basically like boxception. And this is the smartest thing that I've ever seen, because it was my idea, and check it out. Spoiler alert, they do include a USB Mini B to Micro B adapter, so that little spot on the top, you can plop your phone down there, it's not gonna get scratched or anything, and you can charge it natively. Very cool. You'll never be looking for a micro B cable again, which, as everyone in this room can attest to, I'm getting all the nods from behind the camera, is a big problem. Now this one is really interesting to me because I saw this when it was released and I was impressed. This is the Magic Cube AIO, and even though it looks like a pretty normal tower, in fact, it's I'd say even a little bit on the smaller side. The unique thing about this is we're back to all aluminum construction, unlike the Tattoo Fire 2. And this case supports eATX in spite of its small stature. So eATX means you've got support for wider motherboards that can even handle 2 CPU sockets, but in a form factor that's very reasonable. It also has support for a 2x120mm or 2x140mm water cooling radiator in the front, and it has black accents which give it a very, very premium look and feel, much like what you would want in a case that you're going to put a nice dual socket board in. So there's your brushed aluminum side panel. The other side panel has a little bit of Cubitek branding on it, but nothing over the top. The front of the case is a pretty standard looking affair, except that it has a panel on the front that allows airflow past it. So this has a couple of effects. Number one is it's going to block a little bit of noise, and number two is it keeps the front of the case with an uninterrupted, simple brushed finish. There's a single 5 1/4 inch expansion bay for your optical drive in the bottom, and then in terms of front I/O, you've got power reset, indicator LEDs, microphone, headphone, 2 USB 3 and 2 USB 2 ports. In the top of the case, a 140mm cooling fan, and you're going to find the same thing in the back with 8 PCI expansion slots, a bottom-mounted power supply, and there she is, folks, the internal layout of this case. So the motherboard takes up almost the entire interior. You can see that drives can be mounted here on the bottom for 5 1/4 inch, as well as an additional 2.5 inch and an additional 3.5 inch. And then other than that, boom, that. So where do you put your drives? Drives are mounted not only here, but also on the back of the motherboard tray, just like with the Mini Cube, which I think is a very novel and cool way to mount drives because it's my idea. As far as I know, I was one of the first to mount an SSD on the back of the motherboard tray. Well, a bunch of SSDs on the back of a motherboard tray. I love it. It works awesome. There's no reason why those drives need to be in a huge thing in the front of your case. So here we can see where that radiator expandability comes from. 2 140 or 2 120mm fans can be installed here. It comes stock with 2 140 fans. Actually, 4 140mm fans total. The 2 that you see in the front, the one in the top, and the one in the back. There is a filter for the power supply that can be easily removed and cleaned, and this is a very cool, very unique case. Next up, guys, we've got the HPTX ICE, which should be pretty self-explanatory. It's an ICE series case, so it's optimized for cooling, and it's HPTX, which means it's optimized for massively huge motherboards. In the front of the case, we find 5 5 1/4 inch bays, as well as a 200mm cooling fan slot. In the top, we find our standard mix of I/O, so we've got 2 USB 2.0 ports, 2 USB 3.0 ports, and a microphone and headphone jack, as well as 2 more 140mm cooling fan slots. Same thing, clean lines, solid aluminum construction, very minimalistic design, but when we open it up, we find out that even though this case doesn't look that big compared to something like a Corsair 900D, you can definitely fit a massive amount of hardware inside. So it has rubber dampeners on the corners of the side panel to keep vibration from being passed to the case, as well as around the rest of the side panel. Nice solid piece of aluminum here for the side panel. The finish on it is quite nice. And now we're inside. So you can see there's room for a massive motherboard. Pretty much the entire motherboard tray is the size of most normal cases. There are cable management holes here, 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 and here. And you've got the cooling fans that we talked about on the outside now visible. So there's those 2 140mm fans in the top, as well as that 200mm in the front that is included. One more non-LED lit fan in the back, and that one is a simple 120mm, 10 PCI expansion slots, a total of 9 3.5 inch drives supported. Some of them are kind of funny though, so there are adapters and whatnot. So here, I'll walk you through it. So there's 4 down here, one of which is adapted to 2 2.5 inch, should you desire to do that. Then there's 3 more here and 2 more here that are adapted from 2 of the 5¼ inch bays. So that's the way the internal configuration works. There's a filter for the bottom mounted power supply, and I think this pretty much wraps it up. So how would you summarize Cubitek in a nutshell? I guess you'd say it's a made of aluminum mostly nutshell that targets interesting form factors in smaller form factors that can fit interesting hardware. So we've got things like the Mini Cube, which is an incredibly small mini ITX case that can fit a GTX Titan. That can fit hard drives on the back. You've got their HPTX case and their EATX cases, which can fit an enormous amount of hardware in what is a pretty small form factor, and all of this without paying the same kind of premium that you'd pay for something like a Lian Li. Thank you for checking out this Cubitek showcase. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this from NCIX.com.